The unexpected encounter. Jack Turner had always lived a quiet life. A mechanic by trade, he spent most of his days fixing broken cars and machines in the small town of Riverstone. His garage was nothing special, just a dusty old building with a few rusty tools hanging on the walls. It wasn't glamorous, but it was his world. He had no interest in adventure, no longing for the unknown. His only goal was to keep his business running and enjoy the peace of a small town. But everything changed the night the sky fell. It started like any other evening. The sun had just set, and Jack was cleaning his tools, ready to head home. The stars were starting to twinkle above, casting a dim light over the small town. Jack had just finished fixing an old car when he heard something strange. A low rumble, like thunder, but there was no storm. He shrugged it off, thinking it was just the wind or a distant airplane. But then, the ground shook beneath him. A flash of bright light filled the night sky. It was so intense that it hurt his eyes. Jack stepped outside his garage, his heart racing. The sound grew louder, like something was falling from the heavens. He looked up, his jaw dropping as he saw a streak of light racing across the sky. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a meteor. It was something else, something much bigger. The light vanished behind the trees at the edge of town, and the ground shook once again. Jack felt a cold chill run down his spine. Something had crashed. Something big, and it was nearby. His curiosity got the better of him, and he grabbed his flashlight. He wasn't sure why, but he had to see what had happened. Jack rushed toward the woods, his boots crunching on the gravel as he moved faster and faster. The light from his flashlight barely pierced the darkness, but he followed the strange energy in the air, knowing somehow that it would lead him to the crash site. After what felt like an eternity, Jack stumbled into a clearing. The scene before him stopped him in his tracks. A massive, smoking ship lay sprawled across the forest floor. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The ship wasn't like any human technology. It had smooth, metallic surfaces that shimmered in the moonlight, glowing faintly with strange symbols he couldn't understand. The ship was broken, pieces of it scattered across the forest, but it was still intact enough to be a puzzle. Jack approached cautiously, his heart racing in his chest. He could see scorch marks on the ground and the broken wreckage. But what caught his attention was something else. The ship was alive. Well, not alive in the way humans were, but it was pulsing with energy, faint lights flickering inside its broken hull. Jack's flashlight flickered as he stepped closer, and the closer he got, the more he felt an unexplainable connection to the wreckage. It was as if the ship was calling to him. He crouched down beside the ship, his hands shaking as he touched its surface. To his surprise, the metal felt warm to the touch. The symbols on the ship seemed to come to life under his fingers, glowing brighter as he made contact. Jack pulled his hand back in shock, but the ship seemed to respond, humming softly, almost as if it were alive. Could it be? Jack whispered to himself, though he couldn't believe the words he was about to say. Is this alien? Before he could process the thought, something unexpected happened. The lights on the ship flickered, and a hidden compartment in the side of the ship opened. Out from the opening came a series of strange, mechanical arms reaching out toward him. Jack jumped back in shock, but the arms didn't grab him. Instead, they began to repair the broken parts of the ship, moving with precision and speed. It was like the ship was trying to fix itself, but Jack could tell it needed help. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. What if this was dangerous? What if it was some kind of trap? But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The ship was broken, and he was the only one here. Maybe, just maybe, he could fix it. Jack wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. He was just a mechanic, but this was something he had never encountered before. He looked around nervously, but there was no one else to help. He was on his own. The decision was made in an instant. Jack walked over to the nearest section of the ship that needed repair. He wasn't sure how it worked, but he had fixed broken things before. Maybe with a little luck, he could fix this too. He began to work, using tools from his garage that he thought he'd never need for anything this strange. As he worked on the ship, Jack felt a strange sense of purpose. There was something about this ship, about this moment, that felt different. As if this was the start of something bigger, something beyond his small, quiet life in Riverstone. The mysterious visitors. As Jack continued to work on the alien ship, his hands moving with a mix of hesitation and curiosity, the world around him seemed to fade away. The soft hum of the ship's energy filled the air, and Jack began to feel a strange connection to the ship, as if it were aware of his every move. He adjusted his tools, trying his best to make sense of the complex systems before him, but the ship seemed like nothing he had ever seen. Yet he couldn't stop himself. Something about it felt right. The glow from the ship's core intensified as Jack tightened a bolt. He looked down at his hands, amazed at how the ship's technology responded to his touch. It was almost as if the ship recognized him. For a brief moment, Jack wondered if he was dreaming, but the cold, metallic surface beneath his fingers told him otherwise. Suddenly, a strange sound broke the silence. It wasn't the usual creak of metal or the whir of machinery. It was more like a whisper, distant yet clear, as if something was speaking directly into his mind. Jack froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The whisper grew louder, and before Jack could make sense of it, the ship's hull opened wider, revealing the hidden compartment. The sudden movement startled him, and he stumbled back, tripping over a pile of broken debris. But he quickly regained his balance, his flashlight trembling in his hand. That's when he saw them. At first, they appeared to be shadows, flickering in the dim light. Slowly, they emerged from the depths of the ship, their forms becoming clearer as they stepped forward. They were unlike any beings Jack had ever seen. Tall, slender, and covered in smooth metallic armor, they seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. Their faces were hidden beneath dark visors, but Jack could feel their gaze, cold and calculating, as if they were watching him closely. A chill ran down Jack's spine, but he stood his ground. The aliens didn't approach him aggressively. Instead, they moved with grace, almost as if they were studying him, taking in every detail. Jack's mind raced. What did they want? Why were they here? One of the beings stepped forward, its movements swift and precise. The others followed, staying in formation around the ship. The leader, taller than the rest, raised a hand, and the strange whisper Jack had heard earlier grew clearer, though still not in a language he understood. But this time, the voice wasn't just in his mind. It was coming from the being itself. "You have fixed what was broken," the voice said, though it wasn't spoken aloud. The words echoed inside Jack's head, clear and sharp. "You are the one we have been waiting for." Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry. I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The leader's figure seemed to shimmer, and then the voice spoke again, this time slower, as if choosing its words carefully. "You have repaired the ship, but it is more than a machine. It is a key to the future of our people. And now, you must help us rebuild the galaxy." Jack's mind reeled. Rebuild the galaxy. What was this being talking about? He was just a mechanic, a small-town guy who fixed cars. He wasn't a builder of empires or galaxies. Before Jack could say anything, the leader raised a hand, silencing him. The voice continued, its tone now more urgent. "The galaxy is fractured, torn apart by war and strife. We are not the only ones who seek a new future. There are others, hidden in the corners of space, who wish to see the end of our people. You must help us unite them, repair the broken alliances, and create a new order. Only then can the galaxy be saved." Jack's thoughts were racing. The weight of what the alien was saying was heavy. He had no idea how he could help, let alone rebuild an entire galaxy. But one thing was certain. These beings were serious, and they believed in him. "You are human," the leader continued, its voice softer now. "Your kind possesses a strength we have never seen. The ability to persevere, to adapt, to overcome. That is why you are the one who can help us." Jack blinked, trying to process the overwhelming information. These aliens were talking about him, a regular mechanic, as if he were some kind of chosen hero. But how could that be? He didn't even know how to build a spaceship, let alone unite a galaxy. But as he looked around, he noticed something strange. The ship was no longer just a broken wreck. It was alive with energy, pulsing and glowing. The more he worked on it, the more he realized this was no ordinary craft. It was a symbol of something much bigger, something Jack wasn't yet ready to understand. The leader of the aliens stepped forward, its eyes hidden behind its visor, but its presence undeniable. "You have a choice, human," it said. "You can walk away and return to your life as it was, or you can join us. Help us rebuild what was lost. The fate of the galaxy rests in your hands." Jack's heart raced as the words echoed in his mind. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he was ready for such a responsibility. But deep down, he knew one thing. This was no ordinary encounter. Something had changed. Something was calling him to step up, to take a chance. And for better or worse, Jack had a feeling he would never be the same again. The offer. Jack stood frozen as the leader of the alien beings continued to speak. The air around him felt thick, heavy with the weight of their words. His heart was pounding in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He had never felt so out of place, so small, in the face of something so immense. The galaxy, a new order. It all seemed impossible. He was just Jack Turner, a mechanic with no skills beyond fixing broken machines. How could he possibly help rebuild an entire galaxy? The leader's presence loomed over him like a storm cloud, unyielding and powerful, and yet there was something almost inviting about it. The aliens didn't seem threatening, not in the way Jack had feared. Instead, they seemed desperate, desperate for help. "You are not alone in this," the alien leader's voice echoed inside Jack's mind again. "You will not have to do this alone. We will teach you, guide you. But you must make the choice. We cannot do this without you." Jack glanced at the wreckage of the ship, still glowing with an eerie pulsing light. The parts he had worked on were now fully repaired, and more pieces were beginning to come together on their own, as though the ship were healing itself. It was an incredible sight, but it only made the whole situation feel even more surreal. Everything about this encounter was strange, beyond any world Jack had ever known. The other aliens stood motionless, their glowing eyes focused on him, waiting for a response. Jack's hands, once steady and sure, were now trembling. This wasn't just about fixing machines anymore. This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. And yet Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was his moment. His only chance to do something that mattered. "Why me?" Jack asked, his voice quiet but full of uncertainty. "I'm just a mechanic. I fix cars and engines, not whatever this is." The alien leader tilted its head slightly, as if considering the question carefully. Then, in a voice that sounded almost patient, it answered, "That is exactly why you are needed. Your people, humans, are different. You are resilient. You adapt. You fight against the odds. The galaxy needs that strength. We need that strength." Jack's mind reeled. Resilience. Strength. He had never thought of himself as anything special. He had always been just an ordinary guy, working in his garage, trying to make a living. He didn't even know where to begin with something like this. But the more the leader spoke, the more Jack felt a sense of urgency in its words. The fate of the galaxy was hanging in the balance, and somehow, it all rested on his shoulders. The very idea was overwhelming. "We have watched your species for many years," the leader continued. "Your ability to rebuild, to rise up after every defeat. This is what makes you unique. In the chaos of the galaxy, we believe you can bring order if you choose to help us." The other aliens, though silent, seemed to nod in agreement. Jack could feel the weight of their gaze, their hope that he would make the right choice. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. What could he say to this? How could he walk away from something so monumental? "All we ask is that you help us rebuild the galaxy," the leader continued. "You will not do this alone. We will provide you with the knowledge you need, the tools, and the allies to help you. But the choice is yours." Jack stood there, torn. He had never imagined anything like this happening. His life had always been simple. A few customers, a few repairs here and there. But this was something beyond anything he could have dreamed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jack took a deep breath and nodded. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "I'll help you." The leader's eyes glowed brighter, and the other aliens stepped forward, their bodies shifting like liquid metal. They seemed to acknowledge his decision without a word. But Jack could feel the shift, the moment when the weight of his choice became real. "You have made the right decision," the leader said, a hint of relief in its voice. "Now we can begin." With a gesture, the leader raised its hand to the ship's controls. The ship hummed louder now, its energy growing stronger, and the pieces of the wreckage began to move, shifting together with precision. Jack watched in awe as the ship seemed to come alive again, its systems flickering to life as if it had been waiting for this moment. "You will have much to learn," the leader said, "but you will not be alone. Your training begins now." As Jack stepped closer to the ship, the glow from its core filled the clearing, casting strange shadows across the forest. His mind buzzed with questions, but one thing was clear. There was no turning back now. His life as a mechanic was over. The fate of the galaxy rested on his shoulders, and Jack Turner had just stepped into a world far beyond his imagination. Training for the impossible. The days that followed were unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. The once quiet town of Riverstone was now a distant memory, buried under layers of strange new knowledge. His garage, which had always been his safe place, now felt like a relic from a simpler time. The alien ship, its pieces now fully repaired and glowing with otherworldly energy, had become his training ground. Jack's life had been turned upside down in the span of a few days, and every moment felt like a whirlwind, with no time to breathe. The aliens had not left him alone. No, they were there every step of the way, guiding him through the complex tasks they presented. At first, it had been overwhelming. Jack's mind, trained for mechanical work, was now stretched in ways he had never imagined. The knowledge he was receiving seemed endless, as if the universe itself was opening up before him, offering its secrets to be unlocked. The leader, who had introduced itself as Varric, was always there to oversee Jack's progress. Varric's presence was commanding, but never unkind. The other aliens, his silent companions, watched him closely, their eyes glowing with silent approval or quiet concern, depending on how well Jack performed. One of the first lessons was on energy manipulation. Jack had always understood machines that ran on fuel or electricity, but what he was learning now was far beyond that. He was introduced to the concept of energy fields, forces that could power entire fleets, shield planets from destruction, and even bend time in subtle ways. The thought was dizzying, but Jack pushed through. He had no choice. The fate of the galaxy depended on it. At first, he could barely control the small sparks of energy they asked him to harness. It was like holding onto lightning in his hands. But with each attempt, he grew stronger. The training sessions would often last for hours, sometimes days, with little rest. The aliens didn't need to sleep. They didn't need to eat. But Jack was human, and the strain was beginning to show. His eyes were heavy, and his hands shook from fatigue. Still, he couldn't stop. He couldn't afford to. Every day, the galaxy's future seemed to slip further from his grasp. One evening, as Jack stood in front of the ship's energy core, trying to stabilize a small vortex of energy, Varric approached him. Jack could feel the alien's gaze, its eyes burning through him, as if reading his every thought. "You are progressing well," Varric said, the words forming in Jack's mind. But this is only the beginning. The true test lies ahead. Jack wiped the sweat from his forehead, feeling a deep sense of exhaustion. "I don't know if I can keep up," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is too much. I'm just a mechanic. I can't become what you need me to be." Varric's presence seemed to soften, though its voice remained firm. "You are not just a mechanic, Jack. You are something more. This training, this knowledge, it is part of who you are now. Your mind is expanding with each lesson, and with it, your power grows." Jack let the words sink in, but the weight of them felt almost suffocating. He was still just Jack Turner, wasn't he? A small-town mechanic who had accidentally fixed a broken alien ship. This galaxy-saving mission wasn't something he had asked for. He had no idea how to bring together warring alien factions or build alliances that spanned stars. But he couldn't turn back now. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's training took on new dimensions. He learned to pilot alien ships, their controls becoming second nature. He learned the delicate art of diplomacy, though he struggled with it, often feeling out of place in the alien councils where important decisions were made. But with each challenge, Jack grew stronger, more confident. He wasn't the same man who had wandered into the woods that fateful night. He was changing, evolving, into something new. There were moments when he felt completely overwhelmed, when the weight of his responsibility bore down on him, threatening to crush him. But there were also moments of clarity, when the pieces of the puzzle came together, and he could see his place in the grand scheme of things. Those moments were brief, but they kept him going. They reminded him that the fate of the galaxy was indeed in his hands. One evening, as Jack sat alone in the command center of the alien ship, Varric approached him once more. The leader's glowing eyes locked onto his, filled with both wisdom and something else. Something Jack couldn't quite name. "You are ready, Jack," Varric said, its voice steady. "The next phase of your journey is about to begin. The galaxy is waiting for you." Jack stood, his hands still trembling from the intense energy training. He wasn't sure he was ready. But Varric was right about one thing. He couldn't stop now. The galaxy had already been torn apart by war. The pieces were scattered, lost in the vastness of space. And if Jack didn't do something, if he didn't take the lessons he had learned and turn them into action, everything would be lost. "Ready for what?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Varric's eyes seemed to glimmer with a hint of something like hope. "To unite the galaxy, Jack. To bring together the factions to build a new legacy. It starts now." Jack took a deep breath. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers he couldn't even imagine. But he had come too far to turn back. The galaxy needed him, and whether he was ready or not, Jack Turner was going to do everything in his power to save it. The first test. Jack had been training for what felt like an eternity, learning the intricacies of alien technology, mastering complex energy manipulations, and studying the political dynamics of distant worlds. Yet despite all his training, nothing could have prepared him for the real test that awaited him. The calm of the alien ship's interior had become his new normal. The days blended together, each one marked by rigorous lessons and endless study. But there was always a sense of urgency in the air, as though something just beyond his reach was waiting for him to unlock it. It was one evening, as Jack was reviewing strategic plans with Varric, that the leader delivered the news. Jack had passed every trial, every lesson. He had shown promise, but now it was time for his true test, diplomacy. He was to negotiate peace between two alien factions, the Kethrians and the Valkyrans, two species that had been locked in an ancient war for centuries. The two factions were some of the most powerful in the galaxy, each with their own histories, ideologies, and grudges. The Kethrians were known for their strategic minds and technological prowess, while the Valkyrans were fierce warriors, feared for their strength and battle tactics. Both races had been at odds for generations, and Jack was the one they had chosen to mediate the peace talks. The thought was terrifying. How am I supposed to bring these two together? Jack asked, the doubt creeping into his voice. Varick's eyes glowed with intensity. You are human, Jack. You see the world differently. You have the capacity to find solutions others cannot. This is your moment. You have the knowledge, the tools. You just need to trust yourself. Jack's stomach twisted in knots. Trust himself. He barely trusted his ability to repair a broken spaceship, let alone mediate between two warring factions. But there was no turning back. The galaxy was counting on him. He had learned enough to know that if these factions continued their war, it would only bring more destruction, more death. He had to try. Even if he wasn't sure he could succeed, he had to try. The meeting took place on a neutral world, a barren planet where neither side had claimed territory. The council chamber was vast, cold, and devoid of any comforts. At one end stood the Kethrians, their tall figures draped in robes of shimmering silver. At the other stood the Valkyrans, clad in dark, battle-worn armor, their expressions hardened and filled with suspicion. Between them stood Jack, the only human in the room, and the only one who dared to bridge the chasm between these ancient enemies. The tension in the air was palpable. Every word, every gesture could tip the fragile peace toward conflict. Jack could feel his heart hammering in his chest as he stepped forward, trying to steady his breath. This was his first real test, his first chance to prove he could do what the aliens had hoped for. He had to find common ground, a way to end centuries of hatred. I know that both of you have suffered, Jack began, his voice echoing in the cold chamber. But war has taken enough from all of us. The galaxy is in chaos. This fighting, it must end. The Kethrians glared at him, their eyes filled with cold calculation, while the Valkyrans seemed to growl low in their throats, clearly displeased by the humans' presence. Jack swallowed hard but stood his ground. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. He had to be strong, for the galaxy, for everything. The Kethrian leader, a tall, imposing figure, stepped forward. You are human, it said, its voice smooth but laced with disdain. What could you possibly know of our struggles? Our people have been at war with the Valkyrans for centuries. Their aggression has taken countless lives. They are our enemies. How can you possibly stop this conflict? Jack took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. I know that war never solves anything, he said. I've seen it. Small wars, big wars. It doesn't matter. They only leave destruction in their wake. What I know is that you both have something to gain from peace, something you'll never get by fighting. I'm not asking you to forget the past. I'm asking you to look at the future. The Valkyran leader, a massive creature with battle scars etched across its face, stepped forward, his fists clenched. You think we should just forget the bloodshed, the years of loss? It growled. How dare you think peace is so simple? Jack's heart raced, but he stood tall. No, I'm not saying it's simple, but it's the only way forward. I can't promise that there won't be sacrifices, that there won't be hard choices, but I promise that war will only destroy both your peoples in the end. Don't let your hatred be the reason the galaxy burns. For a long moment, there was silence. The tension in the room was so thick that it felt suffocating. Jack could feel the weight of the moment, like the future of countless worlds rested on his next words. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Kethrian leader spoke. You may be right, human, it said, its voice softer now. Perhaps there is a way to end this, but we will not trust the Valkyrans easily. The Valkyran leader growled but remained silent, clearly furious but unwilling to escalate the situation further. Jack could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Had he done it? Had he somehow convinced them that peace was the only option? I'll do whatever it takes, Jack said, his voice steady. But we must start somewhere. Let's start with a ceasefire, and we can go from there. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. The Kethrians nodded, and the Valkyrans, though still wary, agreed. Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The first test was over, and he had succeeded. The ceasefire wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a beginning. The galaxy hadn't been saved, but for the first time in a long time, there was hope. The betrayal, the feeling of accomplishment from the peace talks, was short-lived. Though the ceasefire between the Kethrians and Velkarans had been secured, the galaxy was far from stable. Jack knew that peace wasn't just about stopping a single war. It was about rebuilding alliances, restoring order, and navigating countless other conflicts that threatened to unravel everything. Yet, with every step he took toward peace, something didn't feel right. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. A shift in the way the aliens around him looked at him. A strange coldness that replaced the hope they had once shown. Varrak, who had once been his mentor and guide, seemed distant. The once friendly and encouraging aliens who had trained Jack were now more silent, watching him with eyes that were unreadable, almost calculating. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His instincts, his human instincts, told him that this wasn't just about peace anymore. There was something deeper at play, something hidden beneath the surface of this galactic alliance. One evening, as Jack worked late in the command center of the ship, trying to review data from the peace talks, he received an encrypted message. It was from an unknown source, but the words were clear. Trust no one. The true enemy is closer than you think. Jack froze, staring at the message, his mind racing. The message was brief, cryptic, but it sent a chill down his spine. He couldn't understand who it was from or what it meant, but his gut told him it was serious. There was no time to waste. The galaxy's fate was fragile. And now, it seemed that the biggest threat wasn't an external force. It was a betrayal from within. He needed answers, and the only place he knew to get them was Varrak. He stormed into the leader's chamber, determined to confront him. Varrak, Jack called, his voice echoing in the otherwise silent room. The alien leader looked up, its glowing eyes locking onto him. I need to know what's going on. There's something you're not telling me. Varrak's gaze didn't waver. What are you talking about, Jack? I've been getting strange messages. Jack pressed, his voice rising. People are warning me that I can't trust anyone. That something's not right. Varrak's expression softened slightly, but there was no mistaking the tension in its posture. You've been trained for this, Jack. You've learned to see the truth in the galaxy's darkness. You must be careful, but your mission remains the same. Jack's suspicions grew. There was something in Varrak's voice, something cold and unconvincing. He didn't trust it. The leader's calm demeanor felt almost too rehearsed, as if it were trying to hide something. And that's when it hit him. Varrak wasn't the ally Jack thought he was. Before Jack could respond, the room around them shifted. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the ship's lights flickered. The hum of machinery became louder, more intense, almost vibrating with an ominous energy. Then, the truth came crashing down. A group of alien soldiers, members of the same species as Varrak, stepped forward from the shadows, their weapons drawn and aimed at Jack. He instinctively took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. Varrak, Jack whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. What is this? What's happening? Varrak didn't answer immediately. Instead, the leader's cold eyes locked onto Jack's, filled with a look of finality. You should have known, Jack, Varrak said, his voice a chilling whisper in Jack's mind. We never wanted peace. We never needed peace. What we need is power. You were nothing more than a pawn, a tool to bring us the chaos we required. You, and your so-called human strength, were never meant to unite the galaxy. You were meant to help us control it. The weight of Varrak's words hit Jack like a physical blow. He staggered back, trying to process the betrayal. His mind raced as he realized the true nature of what had been happening. The galaxy's fate had never been in his hands. Varrak and the others had used him, manipulated him, to achieve their own goals. You, Jack started, but his voice caught in his throat. You are no longer useful to us. Varrak continued, his voice calm, almost detached. You will be removed." Before Jack could react, the alien soldiers moved in, their weapons raised. The realization that he had been deceived completely and utterly left him numb. These were the same beings he had trusted, the same ones he had risked everything to help. But now, they were his enemies. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't just stand there and let them take him. His training had prepared him for many things, but not this. Not betrayal. With quick reflexes, Jack grabbed a nearby tool, a heavy wrench, and swung it toward the nearest soldier. The alien staggered back, and Jack didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the exit, his heart racing. He had to get out, warn the others, and figure out how to stop Varric and his faction before their plans destroyed everything. As Jack bolted through the halls of the alien ship, the cold realization hit him harder than ever before. He had been part of something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And now, it was up to him to stop it. The final choice. The ship was alive with tension, its once calm hum now filled with urgency. Jack ran through the narrow corridors, his footsteps echoing against the metal walls. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed to get as far away from Varric and his soldiers as possible. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened, everything he had learned. Varric, the alien leader he had trusted, had turned on him. The peaceful galaxy he had hoped to rebuild was slipping away from him, and in its place, a dark conspiracy threatened to consume everything. He had to stop them. But how? What could a single human do against an entire faction bent on domination? As Jack rounded a corner, he found himself in a small control room. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and he stepped inside, quickly locking it behind him. His breath came in ragged gasps, his mind struggling to keep up with his body. He knew he had to act fast. The soldiers would be searching for him, and Varric's plans were already in motion. But what was the next move? The control room was filled with complex alien technology, screens flashing with data Jack couldn't begin to understand. Still, his hands moved instinctively, as if guided by something deeper. He found the ship's main interface and plugged in a small device from his pocket, the one Varric had given him during his training. It was supposed to help him access the ship's systems, but Jack had never imagined it would be used to disable them. His fingers flew over the controls as he began working to override the systems, shutting down the ship's internal weapons and communication networks. If he could stop the ship from reaching the heart of the galaxy, from spreading Varric's faction's influence, he might have a chance. But it wasn't just about stopping the ship. It was about stopping everything Varric had built, everything Jack had unknowingly helped create. But as Jack worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and when he turned around, he found himself face to face with Varric. "You should have known this would happen, Jack," Varric said, his voice cold and unwavering. "You were never meant to understand the true power of this ship, of what we can achieve. You were just a stepping stone." Jack felt his pulse quicken, but he didn't back down. "You're lying. I know what you really want. Power. Control. You never cared about peace. It was always about manipulation." Varric's eyes glowed with a mixture of anger and contempt. "You think you're the hero in this story. You were never meant to be. You were just a means to an end. Your strength, your resilience, it was never yours to begin with. It was all part of the plan." Jack's mind swirled with confusion and disbelief. Everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in, had been a lie. But as the realization sank in, something else began to rise within him. It wasn't just anger or betrayal. It was clarity. Varric had used him, but Jack had learned too much to let this go. He had a choice now. "You can't control everything," Jack said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "I'm not your tool. I'm human, and I won't let you destroy the galaxy." Varric sneered, taking the step forward. "You are just a man, Jack. You cannot stop this. You cannot stop me." But Jack wasn't listening. His hands moved faster across the controls, inputting codes and commands he didn't fully understand, but felt he had to. The systems were starting to glitch, small signs that the ship was responding to his interference. The alarms in the room began to sound, and the ship's once smooth hum shifted to an unsettling, stuttering noise. Varric's expression darkened. "You think you can fight me? You will regret this." Jack didn't flinch. He knew the consequences. If he failed, the galaxy would fall into chaos. But if he succeeded, he would have the chance to rebuild what had been broken. He would have the chance to make it right. Just as Varric lunged forward, Jack hit the final command, activating a system-wide shutdown. The ship shuddered violently, its power draining as the systems went dark. The lights flickered, and the cold, mechanical voice of the ship's eye echoed through the control room. "System failure. Core energy destabilized." Varric roared in fury, but Jack stood his ground, determined. The ship was in chaos now, its weapons offline, its communications severed. Jack had bought himself time, but not much. He needed to get to the escape pods and warn the galaxy. But the battle wasn't over. As Jack turned to flee, Varric made one last move, a blast of energy shooting from his hand. Jack felt the shockwave hit him in the chest, sending him sprawling to the ground. He gasped for air, his body aching from the impact. Varric was almost upon him, his face twisted in rage. But Jack's hand shot out, grabbing a small piece of alien tech from the control console. With the last of his strength, he fired a pulse, and the blast hit Varric directly in the chest. The alien leader staggered back, his energy crackling out of control, before he collapsed onto the floor, defeated. Jack barely had time to catch his breath. He had done it. He had stopped Varric and his faction from taking control. But the battle was far from over. The galaxy would still need a leader, someone who could unite the factions, someone who could rebuild what had been torn apart. With the ship's power draining, Jack ran toward the escape pods. His heart was heavy, but there was a flicker of hope in his chest. He had made the choice. He had chosen to fight for the galaxy, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in something better. As the escape pod launched into the dark abyss of space, Jack looked back at the wreckage of the alien ship, knowing that his journey was far from over. The galaxy would need time to heal, to rebuild, and Jack knew that he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight wasn't over. But Jack Turner, once a simple mechanic, had become the catalyst for change.